Hello, welcome. Do you like my fun blue light glasses? So it's 11 p.m. Eastern time, and I have this rule where if I'm using screens at this late hour, right, like so closely before bed, I want to use some blue light glasses so that it won't keep me up. So you get my fun glasses on this live stream. But the reason that I'm here is to answer your real estate questions. So subscribers to the VIP list have asked real estate questions, and we're going to jump in with this question from someone who says that they know they're going to be investing in real estate but have yet to flip the switch. The biggest factors that they see is number one, finding other people's money to make that first investment a reality. And number two, and this is really important. Number two is having the gumption to make that happen. First of all, I think that's incredibly self aware because oftentimes when people are nervous about a particular, I, I want to say new skill, but when nervous about a new undertaking, right, it can be very tempting to cloak that nervousness uh, in in the semblance of r- rational, like, where it's not rational, it's rationalizing, right? So people can often cloak nervousness in stating like, well, all right, I ran this spreadsheet, and if we assume the worst case scenario in X and Y and Z and A and B and C, then it comes out to something that is untenable, right? That might happen. Or people might start catastrophizing. And rather than running a spreadsheet, they'll say, oh, but what if X, what if Y, what if Z? Like they start coming up with all of these catastrophic worst case scenarios. It can be really easy when we kind of feel this emotion come up around a new undertaking, and buying a rental property is certainly a very new and quite daunting undertaking to rationalize that. And so I think it's very self-aware. I want to commend you and applaud you for having the self-awareness to recognize that there does need to be some degree of gumption to in getting started. There has to be some level of confidence. There has to be some level of I'm just going to go for it. And that can be really hard to find. And what has helped me a lot, and what I know has helped many members of this community is, and I know this is an overhyped word, but community. I know it's a little bit of an like a cliche term because it's ambiguous. What is community? How is it defined? What are the parameters of it? How strong is it? How weak is it? Um, you know, but fundamentally, the support of others, of peers who have similar goals and are participating in a similar undertaking and share a similar mindset and worldview and uh, set of frameworks, you know, that can be incredibly helpful. And it's true that you don't want that to cross the line into groupthink, right? Because when it becomes groupthink, it can then become unhelpful. There's always, to use another cliche, two sides of every coin. But to the extent that the people who get it. And one of the lessons that I have often learned the hard way is do not take advice from somebody who does not have the results that you want. And specifically, who does not have the results that you want in the domain that you want. Because there might be somebody who has the results that you want in fitness, but they don't have the results that you want in finances, or vice versa. Right. And so take advice only from people who have the results that you want in the domains that you want, because that's where you're going to get your best level of guidance, and that's also where that courage to buy that first investment property is going to come from. So, so then to the first point, which is more, the second point is your second point, the gumption, is mindset, but the first point is far more tactical, which is finding other people's money to make that happen. Now, there are a variety of ways that you can do that, as you know, and we teach in the course Your First Rental Property. We have an entire module on various ways to find financing for a property. But there are a variety of ways, ranging from what we call institutional lending, which is just a fancy term for lending that comes from a bank or a credit union, lending that comes from a financial institution. And there are a huge number of various products that they have. So there's institutional lending, and then there's also various forms of private lending. And all of those are options, all of those are on the table. But the particular type of, so when you say other people's money, um, I don't know if you're more inclined to go the institutional route versus the private lender route. There are pros and cons to both. But the type of financing that you will pursue often is going to depend on the specifically the type of deal that you want to get. Um, in the course, in your first rental property, we intentionally teach the financing module as the third module because first we teach you how to analyze properties. Second, we teach you how to find them. And then once you've learned how to analyze a deal, meaning how to differentiate a good deal from a mediocre one, once you learn that, and then second, you learn uh, where to find those deals, right? Where to look for in order to source those deals. Like, where is that deal flow going to come from? It's only after all of that that you then learn, number three, the financing. And the reason that we do it in that order is because we understand that the financing that you obtain is not going to be obtained in a vacuum. The financing that you obtain, the best financing for that deal, is going to depend on what type of deal it is and where it is. And to use the simplest possible example to illustrate this, if you're house hacking, you're going to get a primary residence mortgage because if you're house hacking, you are necessarily living in one of the units. So, and if it's 4 or fewer units, it qualifies as a primary residence, and that's going to be the cheapest possible loan that you can get. So you know that if you're looking for a house hack deal, it's going to be a primary residence mortgage. By contrast, if you're looking for something that is out of state, if it's an institutional loan, it most likely is going to be either an investor loan or a second home loan, depending on how you plan to use that particular home. If it's a private loan, then a lot of additional options are open. Um, unless of course you're doing this with a partner, in which case if you're doing it with a so all of these, all the financing decision hinges on the type of deal that you're pursuing, because of course if you're doing it with a partner, that introduces a whole other set of complications, but also opportunities depending on how they're going to be using the property and etc. So what I would focus on is first identifying exactly what type of deal you want to do, and where you want that deal to be located, because the type of deal that you do is going to inform the type of financing that you get. All right, so thank you for that question. All right, next. Um, all right, this person says, I have a spreadsheet which I use to evaluate potential properties for purchase. And when I compare the fixed property, interest rate, taxes, and insurance costs only, then even with a very high down payment, they're calculating between 40 to 50%. The monthly base costs are significant above the going rates for rentals in the area. Well, first, I would love to see your spreadsheet, because when we actually have a spreadsheet that we give to all of our students in your first rental property that takes a variety of factors into account. The way that a spreadsheet is constructed may or may not give you the most accurate possible answer. And I say that, I'm going to put an asterisk here. It can sometimes be tempting to conflate precision with accuracy. And in using a spreadsheet, we often arrive at numbers that seem unduly precise. And if a number is unduly precise, meaning it's carried out to a number of decimal points, that level of precision can sometimes have a veneer of accuracy. In fact, accuracy is not reflective of the precision of the answer, but rather of the inputs of that question. And that's the reason that I say that I want to see that spreadsheet, because the inputs that are going into that equation are going to inform at least my assessment of how accurate that answer may be. That's the reason we encourage our students to use the spreadsheet that we've developed. Beyond that, though, it is also absolutely the case that depending on what area you're looking in, that area may or may not have viable rentals that you could find in an MLS open market environment. To use an extreme example, Manhattan, New York, right? If you're looking at rental properties in Manhattan, in the Tribeca neighborhood of Manhattan, uh, it, it's not going to exist there, right? That's not to say that in New York State it doesn't exist. There are certainly great deals to be found in the state of New York, but that is very, very different than looking at Tribeca or Soho. And so, if you think of, if you imagine concentric circles, right? Um, Define your target area and then start moving out in concentric circles around that area, because there's going to be some type of a concentric circle where you may find that sweet spot of proximity to an urban center, but also healthy price to rent ratios that provide viable returns. So those are the two specifics that I would need to look at to assess your particular situation. But in speaking in broad generalities, those are the two things that I would urge you to think about. Um, so, all right. Um, this is a great one. Will your course teach us how to evaluate cities or markets to invest in versus evaluating the property alone? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So one thing that I do inside of the course is I actually, in real time, I filmed my experience um, of evaluating Indianapolis as a place that I wanted to invest. And in fact, I ended up, my most recent acquisition was a duplex in Indianapolis. That was a couple of years ago, 2021, I believe. Um, I'd have to double check that. Don't quote me on that year, but ballpark somewhere around there. Um, the reason that I the reason that I filmed that in real time is because I wanted to depict what that process was like as somebody who had previously never stepped foot inside of Indianapolis. So you get to see that real life case study. And in addition to that, of course, anecdotal evidence or one anecdotal case study can provide a very limited data set. But zooming out from that, we also discuss the principles of what constitutes a city that makes for uh, a viable rental property. And a lot of what that is does it have a diverse economy that is not overly reliant on simply one industry? So, for example, um, I hate to say this about a place that I used to live, Las Vegas is heavily, heavily reliant on the entertainment industry, which is why it had the worst unemployment during the pandemic. It had 25% unemployment during the pandemic because it is so heavily reliant on entertainment, um, that if something happens to that sector, as it did in 2020, then that has an outsized impact on the entire city at large. Detroit is the other is the classic example. Not Detroit of today, of course, but the Detroit of a few decades ago. The Detroit at its worst, what is the classic example. But of course, we see microcosms of this in lots of places. We see smaller towns that were heavily reliant on just one factory, and that factory shut down, and it decimated the economic prospects of that particular town, right? Or small towns that maybe had a military base there, and if that base shut down, it decimated the economy of that town. So you see this in a lot of areas that are overly reliant on either just one industry or worse, just one employer. And so you want to screen when evaluating a rental city to make sure that there's a diversity of industries and inputs, economic inputs in that city. In addition to that, ideally a place that has a major highway running through it. I mean, it's not a requirement, but all else being equal, I tend to like to see that major highway running through it or near it. Um, Reasonable proximity to an airport. Um, those are really the prime. I mean, it has to be large enough that you have a selection of service providers. You don't want it to be such a small town that there are one or two plumbers in town. Because if you get into that situation, there's one or two plumbers in the town, there's one or two electricians in the town, there's one or two HVAC technicians in the town, one or two roofers, right? If you get into that type of a situation where the options for who you could hire when it comes to service providers are slim, then you are really stuck with what might be either unavailable or potentially highly subpar work. Now, that's not obviously, don't misinterpret that to mean that those providers will necessarily provide subpar work. It's simply to state that there is risk that you suffer when you are in an area that has low competition. And when you are in an area in which the few service providers there have an effective monopoly for due to lack of competition. So I'm also interested in using the BRRRR strategy, such as knowing how to find and evaluate distressed properties, estimating rehab costs, how to find and manage contractors, etc. Absolutely. BRRRR is interesting framing because what is the distinction between BRRRR versus a strategy of simply buying something for less than market value, renovating it, putting a tenant in there, and then borrowing against the increased value of it? Like, BRRRR, the specifics of BRRRR as it's taught by Bigger Pockets relies on some particular assumptions. Like BRRRR as it's taught by Bigger Pockets relies on the assumption that you're buying the property for 70% ARV, 70% of ARV. So it relies on a particular assumption of how much that property is going to increase in value. By contrast, if you kind of lose that acronym and just look at what does your average rental property investor who owns multiple units do? You buy a property. Ideally, you buy a property for under market value so that you get instant equity at the closing table. You renovate it because, most properties that have some value add capacity need renovation. And you put a tenant in there and then you refi. All of which are steps that we absolutely cover. So the modules, first we talk about how to analyze properties, how to find properties, how to finance properties. Then we actually go directly into how to renovate properties. And that surprises many people because they're like, wait. Why have you leapt from like financing a property to renovating it? Well, it's because when you're looking for the property, as you're evaluating a property, you want to already be thinking about the renovation prior to when you actually buy the property, prior to when you sign that closing contract. And so strategically planning for what is feasible, what is optimal, what is the happy medium when it comes to those renovations, that's a big part of deciding upfront whether or not you even want to follow through with this property in the first place, right? When you get that inspection report back and you look at that inspection report, a big part of deciding, do I want to do this based on what I'm reading in this inspection report? Do I actually want to buy this or not? A big part of that is going to come from understanding at a high 30,000 foot view level, what is the ideal level of renovation that I could be putting into this in order to, you don't want to over improve a property, but you also don't want to leave money sitting on the table. Right? And so you need to be able to understand how to assess properties for that sweet spot. One classic example, let's say you're touring a property and you notice that there is a section of a wide section of the living room or of the family room that it's just, there's just way too much of it, right? It's it's unnecessarily large. And you notice that there's a window, there's ingress and egress that's up to fire code, meaning if you just build a partition wall, which is incredibly cheap to do, costs like not much in drywall and lumber, right? Because our partition wall is much, much, much cheaper to construct than a load-bearing wall. If you just put up a partition wall and then build in a closet, boom, you've just created an extra bedroom. in the existing floor plan. You haven't added on any new square footage. You've just made more optimal usage of the existing square footage and increase the density in that home. And by virtue of doing so, number one, you've done something great for society. You've helped alleviate some of the housing crisis, because we need more density, we need more supply, and we need more density. But number two, you've done something great for yourself in that, because you have taken this, what was once a 2-bedroom, turned it into a 3-bedroom, now you can command higher rent for it. So it's a win-win on all sides. And so being able to spot opportunities like that, having the knowledge to be able to walk through a space and see that untapped potential and recognize, I could turn this into a bedroom. This is just going to take a partition wall. Or to be able to recognize, this could be a bathroom right here. When you recognize those as you're touring through homes, that's where you really start to see how you can add value to a home, and thus increasing equity. And, you know, that is then the equity that you can borrow against to continually grow your portfolio. So, all right, let's see. Okay. This is a very straightforward one. Questions regarding the self-paced course. How long do we have access to that material? Forever. If I decided to do the self-paced course but realize I would like more accountability, can I jump into the 10-week cohort if I'm on track with them? Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's really common that what often happens, is that students will start at, oftentimes what we typically see is people will start off pacing with the cohort, and that will last for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then life happens. You get sick, you go on vacation, something comes up. And when that happens, people often fall off of that cohort tracking. And so the metaphor that we use is, if you think of yourself as a wolf, right? A wolf can run in a pack, or a wolf could also be a lone wolf, right? So if you're running at a wolf's pace, sometimes you're a pack wolf, right? Sometimes you're a lone wolf, and a lone wolf can always rejoin the pack, mm, you know, or a pack wolf can always go off and be a lone wolf, right? Like wolves can do that, and so can you. And then the other analogy that we use is sometimes we have people who are cheetahs, and so they speed. They don't even want to go through the cohort pace. They binge that course in the first week. We see that level of enthusiasm, and that often comes from people who are like actively currently putting in offers. Um, and then on the flip side, we also have people who we call turtles, and turtles go through it at a turtle pace, which is great, because what we often see with our turtles is that turtles will come back cohort after cohort. So every time that not every time, but every time that we offer a new cohort, we always open it up to all of our alumni. So any alumni who ever wants the cohort pacing is always welcome. And what we often see, our turtles will come back, and sometimes they'll go through multiple cohort pacings with new incoming cohorts, because you know because sometimes we have students enroll who are like, you know what, my goal is to have this down payment saved within the next 4 years, but I want to get started like I want to start the learning process now, so that once my down payment is saved and ready, I'm ready to go. So we'll see students who have an ambition of buying a home, buying a rental property, let's say 4 years in the future, but like they're taking it at a turtle pace and they're learning a little bit along the way, so that, because it keeps them motivated to see, like, you need motivation to like continually, consistently save that down payment month after month after month after month for 48 months, right? You And so it provides that motivation that keeps them saving the down payment as they work towards this longer term goal. So we have those students in the course, and then we also have we have the turtles, we have the cheetahs, we have the wolves, we have the whole ecosystem. So yes, to answer your question, you can absolutely move between cohort-based versus self-paced, and you can do so forever. So, all right. There's one. Okay, so this question that I want to answer, and this is the. I think this is like the question that is on everyone's mind. I'll just short question. I'll summarize it quickly. Is this person says that their question is about investing in real estate now, like investing in real estate in this current environment. And that is the question on everybody's mind, right? Like this, if you haven't noticed, interest rates are a lot higher than they historically have been, and they show no sign of decreasing. In fact, um, Larry Summers, the former president of Harvard and a renowned economist, has actually made public remarks stating that there is a probability, and I think it's slim, but it's out there. There's a low but existing. There is a low probability but a non-zero probability that it's possible that the Fed might increase interest rates if they see inflation not coming down as fast as they would like. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, but his remarks were notable because, you know, if there is, let's say that in the range of possible outcomes, let's say there's a 10%. I'm just making up numbers here, but let's say that there's approximately a 10% probability that interest rates will rise, a 20 to 30% probability, we'll say a 20% probability that interest rates will remain the same through the next 3 or 4 Federal Reserve meetings, and a 70% probability that interest rates will fall, right? Um, it's still notable that that is the range of possible outcomes. You know, it can simultaneously be true that a thing is most likely, you know, a decrease in interest rates is most likely based on the economic data that we have now. That can simultaneously be true while it's also simultaneously true that it is inherently interesting to look at the factors that cause 30% of that probability range to be, and again, I'm making up this these that it's not the actual stated probability, but this is an academic hypothetical. It is still important to look at that in this hypothetical 30% of the probability range that would lead towards interest rates either staying fixed or rising, and ask ourselves, all right, what are the factors that contribute to that that smaller subset of the probabilistic range? Why does that subset even exist in the first place? Like, let's parse that out. Let's unpack that. Right. And what we know is that the economy right now is incredibly healthy. Economic sentiment is low, meaning how people feel about their money is bad. People feel bad about their money. But economic data in terms of average household income, in terms of 401k balances, in terms of employment rates, economic data is actually incredibly strong. There is a kind of a wider gulf between economic data and economic sentiment than we have seen in recent history. And the University of Michigan, by the way, has a consumer sentiment index that measures economic sentiment. And so much of what we know about how people feel about their money comes from the University of Michigan's consumer sentiment index. But where all of this is going is that we are living in an environment where the economy is strong, unemployment is at a record low. It's at a near 70-year low. Productivity is high. Wages are increasing. Inflation is decreasing. The Federal Reserve has signaled a likelihood of not raising rates, a likelihood of either holding rates steady or decreasing. so we're living in times that have really positive economic signals. Um, that being said, a lot of people, a lot of current homeowners have a golden handcuff scenario, uh, where, you know, the golden handcuffs, also known as the lock-in effect, is that they are holding on to mortgages that have such low interest rates that they are disincentivized to sell. And what that is doing is it is, I think, in my opinion, contributing to decreased economic sentiment, because when you don't feel as though you have mobility, lack of a perceived lack of mobility often leads to pessimism, or correlates with pessimism. And perceived lack of mobility comes from a golden handcuff scenario. So I think it's ironic but also fitting that many people who are in a golden handcuff scenario actually are, financially speaking, in a great place. You want a golden handcuff scenario, right? That's the best. Uh, that's such a, you know, the best type of problem that you could have is, oh, this deal is so good, I don't want to walk away from it, right? So you want a golden handcuff scenario, while at the same time, the lack of mobility that you feel from it could actually harm sentiment. It could harm your feelings about your financial position. So, and of course, it also impacts behavior, right? As homeowners are locked into these golden handcuffs, fewer homes come onto the market, and that means that housing supply, which is already in short supply, there's already not enough housing. You know, house supply cannot keep up with demand. Um, in addition to that, you now have just fewer existing homes coming onto the market. Now, we have seen some good news lately in terms of building has actually increased, so new construction starts has increased, but there's such a long lead time um, between when new construction starts happen and when those homes are available. That's number one. And number two is, even though new construction starts have increased, it is still nowhere near enough. And so what this points to is an economic scenario in which many factors are in place for home prices continuing to rise. Um, and that, from the point of view of somebody who wants to buy a rental property, uh, is both good and bad news, because on one hand, of course, you want to buy an asset that you predict is going to rise. That's why people buy stocks. That's why people buy rental properties. That's why people buy any given asset. You buy assets because you uh, predict a likelihood of that asset rising in the future. So on one hand, that's great theoretically. On the other hand, that makes it more expensive to get into the game, right? Because now homes are more expensive, right? And mortgage interest rates are more expensive. So you've got to come up with a lot more money. You've got to come up with a higher down payment because the cost of that home is more. And that home has to rent for more money because um, because you're paying a lot more for that mortgage, right? So the gross revenue that you collect, the rental income that you collect, has to be high enough to be able to cover the added burden of the mortgage expense that you will be covering. And so what that does is it even further decreases or narrows that range of um, that deal flow, the possible homes that fit your selection criteria. That deal flow ends up getting even more curtailed. So it's a tricky time for uh, rental property investors, because you simultaneously have all of these economic indicators that would make you want to get into the game. And also, the reality of getting into the game is that it's arguably harder now. I'm not even going to say arguably, I won't even qualify it. It is, in aggregate, harder now than it was back in 2018, 2019. Um, it is. In aggregate, your individual situation may vary. And so, should you strive to buy a rental property now? I think if depending on what else is going on in your personal financial life, um, if the factors in your personal financial life are settled and stable, then it's a great time to buy a rental property. It's a asset class, a very stable asset class with strong prospects of continuing to rise, and the returns that it generates really buys towards an income stream, which is great, particularly for people who are interested in financial independence, or just simply in diversifying their asset base. But by the same token, um, the the need to come up with a hefty down payment, and B, find something that has a healthy price to rent ratio is more imperative than ever. And that's why, for I think a lot of people, buying an out of state investment is going to be, uh, depending on where you live, is probably for a lot of people going to be the most optimal route. And the reason for that is that when you buy out of state, when you're not confined to the area where you live, and I'm using out of state as a general catch-all term for non-local, right? So I live in New York City. I'm using out of state is an inaccurate generalized term for simply not local to this particular city. So, I could buy something up in upstate New York, for example, or I could literally go out of state to Indianapolis, or to Toledo, Ohio, or to uh, you know Columbus, the Columbus area, although that's kind of run up a bit, or Lexington, Kentucky. Uh, when you have the freedom to buy anywhere, when you have the freedom to invest anywhere, you have a better likelihood of finding deals that are, number one, lower priced, which means you need a lower down payment, and number two, that have a healthier price to rent ratio, the type of price to rent ratio that you're actually looking for. So, uh, so if you want, I'm going to put an asterisk here. The exception is if you want a house hack, that's a different conversation entirely. I love house hacking. I support it. I think it's a great idea. We're going to have that as a separate discussion. But assuming that you do not want to house hack, I think for most people who are not house hackers, the ideal scenario for most people, again speaking in broad general terms, is going to be buying outside of your local area, because that frees you up to then search for the most profitable deals, not simply the most proximate deals, right? Profitability over proximity. So those are my answers. So those are answers to some additional questions that have come in from subscribers to the VIP list. If you are not on the VIP list, you can join for free. It is sign up affordanything.com/VIP list. I will see you there. Thank you so much for everyone who is watching this live. I appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed my fancy blue light glasses that I wear at night, so that although I've been trying to kind of look off to the side so that the reflection doesn't shine. It's tricky to wear glasses while doing a live stream. I've never done this before. So thank you for joining, and I will talk to you again shortly. Take care.